Chad, welcome back. Great to have you on.
Good to see you, Mark.
All right, so let's dig into our topic today, which is really going to be around planning, especially towards ending this year, which was tumultuous, and getting into 2021. I know that you've been having a lot of reach outs in the market, talking to you about how to properly do this. Let's just start with an overview of what, when we say planning, that actually means generally from a tech revenue operations type perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So we're into many call it strategic planning season, especially for those that are running off the calendar fiscal, which many do. But regardless, we're always in planning mode for those of us that are running a company. You're looking at your quarter, and so I think about it as really the look back at historical information. So it could be from the year to date or maybe the quarter that's ending, getting a good sense of that and just what's happening in the business is really the pulse, and then planning forward. And so right now what's happening is more of the fiscal planning for 2021, which you mentioned. And so, yeah, with a lot of the folks that I'm working with, this is very top of mind. So it's really a financial exercise in many cases, right? But it's sort of nuanced in that you're pulling together a bunch of the information I mentioned, and then you're trying to plan forward in really a spreadsheet. You're looking at inputs and outputs of your business so that you can build that trajectory or that horizon for the next year or even coming years, depending on how far out you want to go. So yeah, that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about the plan itself, that as a CEO or as a founding group, you are thinking about, you're looking at, which then sort of falls out. We can get into all the different areas of it, really falls out to how your team may change or work towards that plan, your revenue target, right? Which is usually, and we can talk about top down and kind of bottom up view of this, but really it's getting into those aspects which are going to, set you on your path and what you're going to track against and how you're going to manage the business for the upcoming year.
And so what types of questions are you getting? I mean, we all know up front, it's been a tough year, right? So what types of questions are you getting now about planning for 2021? What's it mainly around?
It depends on stage of company. The companies that are a bit, past series A and above, let's say, they're usually a bit more clear in this area naturally. And so there's a cycle or sort of a cadence working with their finance team. They at that point probably have at least one person, if not a few, in that area that are really focused on sort of the FP&A side of this, which is where the starting point is. But a lot of the questions I'm getting are, I would say, more focused on the earlier stage companies. How do I do this? Period. It's new. It's sort of like it's hard enough to get your business off the ground. You sell some stuff, you get some customers, and now you hit the point where you're into your first year. Say it's the first year of your business, and you're doing well, and you're like, wow, this is really starting to happen for me. And this, I've had a couple great discussions this week that have sounded like that, and that's great. But then it's like, oh geez, I'm now have 5, 6, 10 employees. I now have a new year ahead of me. People are asking me about a million questions about comp and what does that mean for me. They're looking at from their individual chair that they're sitting in, and so a lot of those questions come up. It's almost just like, what is the baseline practice, best practice to do this? It's November 10th. We're going into 2021 shortly. We're going into Christmas season. Just how do I front load some of this work so that I can have a logical, coherent plan that I can communicate to my team for the new year? So that's really what I would say is sort of happening the most. The other companies, as I mentioned, tend to have a decent idea as to how their kind of the rhythm of planning works for them. But as we know, the best businesses are planning pretty far out. They have a pretty clear trajectory as to where they're trying to go. And then they're staring at the quarter's performance, just like a public business. And the best founders I work with are very diligent in this area. So they're looking at the quarter the same way a public market CEO needs to look at it. And when you see that early, you're like, wow, this team is going to fly.
And so you just mentioned one, which is, I think, planning ahead pretty far. What are some of the other best practices? Are there frameworks out there that people can turn to, have already completed Excel sheets around this? Like if you're literally just starting out, as you said, seed series A, where should I start out?
Yeah. So first step is, I think about it in most cases, sort of what people call top down and then bottom up planning. In every case, whether it's your own personal board of advisors, which I recommend if you don't have a formal board of advisors or board of directors to set up from a mentorship and advisor standpoint. But what's the top down number? really, right? I mean, it's a business, depending on if that's user growth, whatever your model may be. But in most cases, it's a revenue number. There's a revenue number that is associated with the performance of the year, let's call it, right? So let's use an example, 2021, the business we want to get to $5 million in revenue top line. Great. So, whether you're the CEO or you're the sales lead, and whatever that, whatever term you're using for that individual, you get that number given to you. And then what do you do next? Well, you have to go away and you have to do a bottom up plan against that number, which essentially, yes, there is templates and there is frameworks, and I'm happy to share with anyone that's interested in this separately, and we can maybe even add one to the post. But it's really typically a spreadsheet exercise where you're filling out these inputs and you're working up to that number. So you look at, again, the historical data you have. If you don't have much data, then you look at benchmark data. So there's good benchmarks out there, Serious Decisions, number of other folks have put out there that shows you conversion rates and just general things around your funnel. But you're sort of working through each of these areas. So it starts with, I have a planning sheet, which maybe the one I could share with the group, and it's more specific to a subscription business in terms of current base of customers and then net new business that you're growing. But I mean, that's the same for any business. It's repeat business, and how are we going to leverage our customer base that we have versus like brand new customers. So you kind of start from that perspective, right? What's the mix? What type of transactions do I do is a part of this. So if you do big enterprise, what's the average ticket price for that? If you do mid-market, same thing, SMB, et cetera. So you sort of work out what are the transaction types that I have or that exist in my business. And then you do a bit of a plan as to, okay, well, just quick math on, let's say the 5 million example, here's the basic customer I have. How much do I expect to renew, or can I see myself in 2021 getting from that base of customers in terms of revenue? And then that's going to inform your net new need to get to that number. Right. So that'll give you a number of deals, right? Which is a really helpful number to have. So this means I need to do this many transactions across these types. So you usually start at that level, right? From there, that's going to fit you down into your headcount and your capacity planning, right? So from a sales perspective, again, we're going to focus on this conversation on sales-driven models. So in a sales-driven model, you have salespeople. So you have a sales team. In that sales team, they're going to have quota. They're going to have drivers that, again, allow you to try and get to the coverage, many call it, but on the business to try and get to that number again, right? So if you have, let's say, once you've done that first step that I just discussed, you're going to then fit it into your team. So your team will be, okay, well, again, based on those transaction types, are going to tell you what type of team you need. If you're doing big enterprise deals, you probably need a rep or two that is a good enterprise seller, right? So that fits into like, here's the team that I need. So maybe I need 5 reps, let's say. I need 3 of them to be enterprise, doing, probably $1 million plus, if not more in quota. And then you have sort of reps that are focused on smaller segments, let's say. And that fits out your team, which is then obviously going to give you kind of an over under on your number, right? So if I'm trying to do 5 million, I need to right there, do I have the team? What are my hiring requirements? What is the capacity this team need to look like by when in order to make the 5 million true in 2021? So that's kind of step 2. Step 3 then becomes the funnel. So once you have kind of that sort of, and this is the high level starting point. This is where I tend to like to start with folks is if we can work through this sheet together and kind of get a good summary view of what we're trying to do, then we can get into the heavier budgeting detailed stuff, which we can talk about in a sec. But then finally is your funnel. So again, you have a net new funnel, which is going to operate differently than an existing basic customer funnel, whether that's for renewals or expansion. Your basic customer should convert higher based on the type of deal or transaction better than a net new. That's just the reality, right? So you have a funnel that has conversion rates from top to bottom for net new. You work that out based on the stuff we just did. And then again, you have the customer funnel as well, which is then going to give you, if I'm planning on doing this much revenue with the customer base, here's how that funnel will operate, and ultimately what I need to work against month on month in order to make those 2 things true. So again, the sum of parts becomes the overarching revenue story for the deals, the deal types, and the revenue output of those deals by volume. Then into the team that's going to be required and in place, right? Based on, and I'll show you the gap analysis a bit on the coverage you need as well as the team you need, right? And then you get into the two funnels themselves from a sales perspective. Those four pieces give you really good foresight as to, what it really will take in order to try and achieve that sort of a trajectory. That's usually a sobering experience for many of the CEOs I work with, in terms of like, whoa, like maybe that 5 million is a little aggressive, Chad. And I'm like, well, there you go. You need to hire 5 reps tomorrow. Like, I mean, it starts to get the real deal out on the table, which is why it's a good starting place. And then just to finish, I think the next step is then more of your full, like, working with your finance team. This is typically depending on the skill set, but usually it's outside of, specifically the sales team or the CEO planning in that area. It's more like, okay, let's get finance involved, or let's get a person that's a bit more of CFO, the budgeting. Let's tie this down to the numbers. And that's a full budget schedule process across the business. It's, that's where your functions are all tied into one. So you have marketing, sales, customer success, again, in the SaaS context, et cetera, et cetera. Now you have a full budget that's based on the revenue drivers, and that growth, as we know, funds. We're funding for that growth. We're making investments. We're making decisions based on our situation. And so that's the sort of the 2-prong approach. And it's important to keep, this is something that usually does happen. This process happens more annually, but we're still doing the kind of, I call it the windshield wipers, but the look back and the look forward, all the time, right? Whether it's the last month, we get better at looking at even a tighter period of time. Here's how October went. Great. What do we learn? Great. Let's bring that into November. There's that shorter window. And then there's your quarters. Again, more data, more of a view of what's happening in this time period of the year. You can start to look at, and this is as your business grows, getting tighter on this to begin with. You can see how this gives you so much advantage as you grow, because the next year, the following year, you can now look at year-on-year data. You can now look at the decisions made and how we performed. And that's running a good quality business. So that's the outline. I think, for those that it's new for a lot of people, and it gets a little kind of tricky at first, but it's simplifying it. And I find that first sort of framework, or that first cheat sheet in a way, is a good starting point. And then you can kind of get into the deeper financial budgeting and scheduling from that standpoint.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about some of the complexities that are probably popping up right now. Let's get specific. Let's say it's a subscription business, SMB, 20K average deal size, roughly. Let's say that 2020 was just a disaster, which we know for some companies it has been, right? All my conversion rates gone, like blew out of the roof. I tried to get more MQLs, more SQLs, got a bunch of demos, but nothing closed, totally missed the number. And now I'm coming to you, Chad, and trying to forecast 2021 and trying to figure out, one, how do I build this plan? But two, how do I start diagnosing what the problems were and start about fixing it? I mean, what do you recommend to put something in front of the board that actually makes sense? Like, how do I just approach things for 2021 to try to recover?
Yeah, important question. It's still the same process, Mark, right? I think, it's a reflection exercise with your team. So pulling all the inputs together, deciding the best way to do that tends to be sort of a master deck, maybe to start with, or something that people can collaborate on nicely. Documents, fine as well. But like, let's pull the feedback together from different areas of the business. In 2020, this was our plan. Here's how here's actual results to plan. And kind of ask those why questions and go a little deeper on, okay, well, yes, our funnel didn't operate as we thought it would. Yes, we can talk about COVID and the risks we faced, and all of that's very true and real. But yeah, it's spending some time. Like, you have to carve out time and put some energy into this, and it pays dividends, because as a group, it brings you closer together too. So whether that's kind of your offsite thinking, or it's just, in today's world, getting on and carving out at least a full morning, if not a day, with a proper agenda, and kind of just going through each area of the business and talking through those challenges and being open, right? I mean, if you're going to expect to have a culture of performance at a high level, and you're looking at like crazy growth, which a lot of companies, I get it, but it's like, you kind of scratch your head too. It's like, if we're expecting that, we need to be we need to be good to our people. Like we need to have time, open area to think around this reflection, right? Especially with the leaders and people that are trying to drive the chain link that is a lot of these businesses, right? Marketing impacting sales and product, and and how this all works. Like you need to have that. This is the hardest thing, right? This is leadership. This is like having that coherent strategy. So I think, yeah, it's carving out a good amount of time, reflecting. You need to make time for it. I know this has come up a few times in our sessions, but it's like, you hear all the time that people don't have time for this stuff. Or like, I don't have time to do documentation, Chad. I don't have time to do planning, Chad. Then you don't have time to run a business, right? That's just, you can't run constantly on the treadmill and be against, and hit the wall all the time. Like it just does not work for you and your team. And this I see all the time, which goes off into a different tangent, but it's true and it's tied together. You have to create space. You have to talk openly. You have to have good feedback cycles. You need to be open and honest with each other and just like face the facts together. And that's okay. And yes, underperformance happens based on what we plan to do. We're all trying to do aggressive, fun, amazing things for the world. Like we are, like that's what these businesses are doing. So be real about that. Spend a couple days on that. Give people some time to kind of dump some of their thoughts into a document. Again, like get collaboration and then meet and go through that process together. And then that should distill your plan forward a lot more clearly. So you should then, based on that, have like, you know what, that was just overly aggressive, even regardless of COVID, yada yada. You get into that, and now you can start to set, if it's OKRs and proper plan, and you spend that time. Everyone feels better, right? Everyone feels better coming out of these sessions. And so, if for those listening, I mean, if you're looking for help with this kind of stuff, or you want like, we're happy to talk about this stuff. Like there's definitely great people out there that we can point you to or be involved with where they can help facilitate and help you kind of do this sort of stuff. But like build that muscle, and it's going to support you down the road big time.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a, like as you said before, a lot of this is top down, and just knowing that you're actually planning out for the organization will help the people on the ground so much. Or I guess, what's your opinion on actually changing the plan? So you've heard of some companies changing their projections during COVID and adjusting, and others saying, no, like we're going all out on the number and we're going to hit it. What's your take on that generally? Should it be open to change, or should it be something that's just strict and everybody rows towards the same end goal always?
Yeah. So it's situational. Definitely bigger business with higher impact on what that means downstream is, it can be huge, right? If you're not gonna revert or not gonna adjust a plan, that can hit so many different things we're talking about, from expenses and just like what you're actually trying to do, what that means to an individual person in their role. So the overarching answer would be, you have to be open to it. But we're facing a global crisis here. So adjusting your terrain accordingly, it's just reality. But in general, it's tough because in many cases, if you set an annual plan and that is, a much more sort of strict formalized process with the board and everything else, like you do have a lot of downstream impact, and you're dealing with a lot of sort of change management against that, right? When you have salespeople have quotas and they're trying to, they're working in that workflow, it can be tough. But bottom line, it has to happen in some cases, especially this year. But generally, I think, you want to try and keep rolling on your annual plan as best you can, and just sort of work within those guardrails to adjust where needed, right? Like know that we're still aiming, right? But we got to arm people differently, the aiming and arming. We got to arm people maybe a little differently for how that's going to work, or just the volume of deals we're going to be able to actually get into the system. Like all these sort of inputs again, and at a more tactical level change a little bit. But I think you can't just keep creating volatility either, right? You can't just be like, oh, well, the number's 5 million, now it's 3, and we're just like going on this roller coaster all over the place. Like I think, based on everything we're saying, takes energy and takes a lot of bandwidth to go through and properly communicate at an executive level and then down into your teams. And so if you're constantly changing that communication and cadence, you lose a lot of trust in your business. And so as much as, we're facing what we're facing right now, and that's a very real discussion, in many cases you just have to try and kind of work through the details with different teams, and ultimately how that's going to impact them as a team and individuals on that team. And so it becomes an exercise in that way. But I personally have seen, impact on both sides. So I think it's a tricky question, but it's important to really evaluate it in that sense.
Perfect. All right, Chad. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I think it's an important topic, especially as we come out to the end of the year here. As always, we'll be doing this weekly, but thanks for coming on and talking about this.
Yeah, thanks, Ron.